Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that because of her race, a young girl named Linda Brown could not attend a school close to her home, but instead had to walk through a dangerous neighborhood to take a bus to a school 21 blocks away? Learn that racial segregation was considered separate but equal, according to a Supreme Court ruling known as Plessy versus Ferguson, but later found to violate the 14th Amendment that guarantees equal protection under the law. Discover that on May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled that separating students by race was unconstitutional, and that the decision known as Brown versus Board of Education changed attendance at public schools across America forever.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are focusing on, well, a truly massive moment in history, the May 17, 1954 Supreme Court decision, Brown v. Board of Education.
Yeah, and the stack of materials you brought us for this analysis is, it covers a pretty wide spectrum.
It really does.
We have historical accounts of Topeka, Kansas, right in the 1950s, plus the constitutional framework of the 14th Amendment and personal reflections from the actual key figures involved in the lawsuits.
Right, and we're also looking at a foundational religious text from the Doctrine and Covenants, which is fascinating because it frames the moral argument that really underpins the whole legal battle.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to unpack how a local, honestly logistical frustration over a neighborhood school commute somehow sparked a nationwide legal shift.
A shift that totally shattered a 50-year-old precedent.
Yeah, and reshaped American society entirely. And to start doing that, I want you to just imagine looking out your front window right now.
Yeah.
Imagine you can see your neighborhood elementary school just down the street. It's right there, maybe 4 blocks away.
You can probably hear the recess bell from your porch.
Exactly. It's a completely normal, easy, safe walk. Now, imagine being told by the government that you are legally forbidden from letting your 7-year-old child walk those 4 blocks.
Which is just wild to even think about today.
Right. Instead, the law requires your child to navigate a dangerous area on foot, just to stand at a bus stop, to be driven to a completely different school 21 blocks away, in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and that scenario, it really isolates the daily reality of segregation in the mid-20th century.
It makes it so tangible.
It does, because
yeah.
we tend to view historical events from, a high altitude. We focus on the polished marble of the Supreme Court and these sweeping constitutional declarations.
The big dramatic moments.
Right. But the reality is that these major shifts, they originate on the ground, in the daily friction of ordinary lives. So to understand the legal battle, we really have to start on the streets of Topeka in September 1950.
So Topeka at that time had a population that was approximately 80% black.
Which is a huge majority.
It is. But despite that significant majority, the school system was rigidly and legally segregated by race.
Yeah.
And this environment is where Reverend Oliver Brown attempts to enroll his 7-year-old daughter, Linda, in Sumner School.
And Sumner is that all-white elementary school situated just those 4 blocks from their front door.
Right. But the school administration denies her enrollment entirely just because she is black.
And this denial, it forces her into that alternate route we just described.
The 21-block detour.
Exactly. She has to walk through a hazardous area, navigating traffic and a rail yard environment, simply to board a school bus that transports her 21 blocks away to an all-black school.
It's just a rail yard.
Yeah.
For a 7-year-old. The physical toll that kind of commute takes on a child day after day, year after year is just immense.
It really is. And the sources include a reflection from Linda Brown decades later in 1985.
Oh, yeah. That quote is so revealing.
It really clarifies what her father and the other parents in Topeka were actually fighting against at that early stage.
She said, my father was like a lot of other black parents here in Topeka at that time.
Right.
They were concerned not about the quality of education that their children were receiving. They were concerned about the amount or distance that the child had to go to receive an education.
And that distinction, I think, completely changes how we often perceive the origins of this movement.
How do you mean?
Well, the initial spark wasn't a coordinated protest against the curriculum or the qualifications of the teachers at the segregated schools.
Oh, I see.
Parents simply wanted neighborhood schools. They wanted the basic utility of sending their children to a safe, nearby building.
Rather than forcing them onto overcrowded buses for these long distances.
Exactly. It grounds the history in a very basic parental instinct.
Just keeping your child safe and close to home.
Yeah.
But standing between these parents and that basic utility was a massive legal framework, right? Established back in 1896 by the Supreme Court ruling Plessy v. Ferguson.
Right, Plessy Ferguson, which established the whole doctrine of separate but equal.
Separate but equal.
It argued that separating citizens by race was perfectly constitutional, provided that the facilities given to each group were deemed, equal.
Right, and for over half a century, this doctrine provided the legal cover for states and municipalities to enforce rigid segregation in literally every aspect of public life.
Everywhere. But the physical reality of Linda Brown's 21-block commute totally exposes the flaw in that doctrine.
The equality was just an illusion on its face.
Completely. And the physical toll of these daily commutes began to really mobilize civil rights groups.
So by the mid-20th century, the NAACP starts bringing forward legal and political challenges.
And the sources show this was a coordinated multi-state strategy. It wasn't just Kansas.
Right. Parents in Virginia, South Carolina, Washington, D.C., Delaware, and Kansas are all filing lawsuits,
demanding their school districts allow black and white students to attend school together.
And Brown v. Board of Education was filed against the Topeka School Board as part of this broader push.
Yes, but when the case was heard at the district court level, the judges actually ruled against the plaintiffs. They dismissed the case.
Wait, hold on. The lower court just dismissed this.
They did?
How does a judge look at a 21-block detour through a literal rail yard and conclude that's legally equal to a 4-block walk down a residential street?
That sounds absurd now, right?
I mean, what was the legal justification for completely ignoring the commute?
Well, the district court relied strictly on that Plessy precedent, and they measured equality through a very narrow physical lens.
Okay.
They looked at the brick and mortar, they evaluated the physical condition of the school buildings, the age of the textbooks, the desks, and the qualifications and salaries of the teachers.
Just the physical inventory, basically.
Yeah, and because the Topeka School Board had ensured that the facilities and resources at the black schools were roughly comparable to the white schools, the court ruled the schools were substantially equal.
That is, I mean, it's like judging the equality of two restaurants purely by checking if they both have tables and chairs.
While completely ignoring the fact that one is serving a gourmet meal and the other is serving rotten food.
That analogy hits the core of the issue perfectly.
They were assessing the infrastructure while entirely dismissing the actual human experience of accessing that infrastructure.
Exactly. The court just ignored the psychological and physical burden placed on the child.
And they ignored the inherent message of exclusion. Right. The message that comes with being legally barred from the building right at the end of your street.
Yeah. And because the lower courts refused to measure equality by anything other than, building materials, the NAACP realized something important.
That these local lawsuits were a dead end.
Yes. Arguing over the material conditions of the schools was getting them nowhere. They had to attack the constitutional definition of equality itself, right at the Supreme Court.
Which means confronting the highest court with a fundamental question about the 14th Amendment.
Right. And this is where Thurgood Marshall comes in, acting as chief counsel for the plaintiffs. He built the entire legal strategy around the Equal Protection Clause.
And the text of the Equal Protection Clause is brief, but it carries the entire weight of this argument.
Do you have the text there?
Yeah, it states, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws."
Equal protection.
Right. And Thurgood Marshall's argument really zeroes in on the words make or enforce.
Because Marshall is arguing that the state of Kansas is actively enforcing a law that disadvantages Linda Brown solely based on her race.
Exactly. He isn't arguing that the buses are subpar or the buildings are crumbling.
He is arguing that the state's deliberate action forcing her away from her neighborhood school denies her equal protection under the law.
He brilliantly shifted the focus from the physical facilities to the psychological and social impact of the state-mandated separation. He argued that when a state uses its power to separate people based on an immutable characteristic like race, it implicitly assigns a lower status to one group.
Which violates the very concept of equal protection.
Right. And when the Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, finally delivers its decision, It is a unanimous verdict in favor of the plaintiffs.
Unanimous. Every single justice signs on.
Every single one?
And a unanimous decision on such a contentious issue, that has to be a deliberate choice.
Oh, absolutely. It prevents lower courts or state legislatures from weaponizing a dissenting opinion to resist the ruling.
That makes sense. And Chief Justice Warren's written opinion attacks the 1896 precedent directly.
He didn't pull any punches.
No. He writes, separate but equal has no place, and legally declares that segregated schools are inherently unequal.
And that word inherently is so crucial. The inclusion of the word inherently is the mechanism that completely dismantles Plessy e. Ferguson.
Because it targets the root of the issue.
Exactly. The court finally recognized that the very act of separation is the mechanism of inequality.
Right.
You can provide identical buildings, identical textbooks, identical transportation, but the deliberate drawing of a legal line between children of different races creates an intrinsic imbalance.
It generates a feeling of inferiority.
Right.
Regarding their status in the community.
Yes, and that affects a child's mind in ways that are unlikely ever to be undone. The system is structurally, intrinsically, inherently unequal simply because the separation exists.
So by ruling that the separation itself is the violation, the Supreme Court basically removes the legal scaffolding that supported segregation across the entire country.
It was the domino that started it all. Once school districts are stripped of the power to segregate by race, the logic applies everywhere else.
Right, because within a few years, we see this specific legal reasoning sweep through other public arenas. Desegregation reaches hotels, restaurants, public transportation, businesses.
Because if the state cannot enforce separation in the schoolhouse because separation is inherently unequal, well, the state cannot defend separation on a bus or in a dining room either.
It's the exact same logic.
Exactly. The legal truth established in Brown v. Board forces a rapid dismantling of segregation across the broader social fabric.
And, the sources for this deep dive introduce another really interesting layer to this analysis.
The religious text.
Yeah. We have an excerpt from the Doctrine and Covenants, specifically D&C 78.6. And the text reads, For if ye are not equal in earthly things, ye cannot be equal in obtaining heavenly things.
I love that we are including this because this text takes the concept of equality out of the courtroom and places it into a philosophical and really a spiritual context.
It does.
It forces an evaluation of what constitutes an earthly thing.
So if I'm reading the D&C text correctly, it's arguing that spiritual equality is literally an illusion if physical equality doesn't exist.
That's a great way to put it.
And that frames Marshall's legal argument as a moral imperative. I mean, an earthly thing isn't just a desk or a textbook.
No.
It's the physical reality of a safe 4-block walk to school versus a dangerous 21-block detour.
Right. The text asserts that practical earthly equality is an absolute prerequisite for any higher, fundamental, or heavenly equality.
Because how can you claim to value someone equally in a moral or spiritual sense if you are actively participating in a system that deprives them of equality in the physical realities of daily life?
You can't. And the Supreme Court's conclusion that segregation is inherently unequal directly mirrors the mechanism described in the Doctrine and Covenants.
It's the same core truth. You can't declare that everyone is equal under the law while simultaneously forcing one group of 7-year-olds to endure an exhausting commute just to keep them physically separated from another group.
Exactly. The earthly inequality corrupts the broader concept of equality entirely.
And the lived reality of Linda Brown proved that the earthly things were not equal, exposing the core hypocrisy of the separate but equal doctrine.
The legal framework finally had to reconcile with the physical reality. The long, multi-state legal battle ultimately aligned the earthly legal structure with the underlying moral logic.
The logic that you cannot have a divided society and claim that the divisions don't matter.
They always matter.
Yeah. And the progression here, from a daily logistical frustration to a unanimous Supreme Court decision, it really illustrates how large-scale historical shifts occur.
They don't usually start in the abstract.
Right. The catalyst wasn't an abstract debate over constitutional theory. It was Reverend Oliver Brown in Topeka, Kansas, looking at a school 4 blocks away and deciding his daughter should be able to walk there safely.
And that practical desire fueled a movement that spanned multiple states, empowered brilliant legal strategists, and eventually forced the highest court to dismantle a deeply entrenched injustice.
It really highlights the power of focusing on the tangible, everyday impacts of systemic policies.
It does, and it also, I think, requires us to look at the persistence of flawed logic.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, for over half a century, The concept of separate but equal was defended by legal scholars, politicians, and the broader society.
It was just the accepted norm, legally enshrined and culturally enforced.
Right up until the moment it was unanimously recognized as completely inherently unequal.
The 50-year gap between Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. Board of Education shows how easily a society can institutionalize an absurdity and defend it as a necessity.
Yeah, the people living within that 50-year window just accepted the structural norm, often without even questioning the daily damage it inflicted on children walking past their neighborhood schools.
Which leaves a pretty significant question for you to consider as we wrap up this deep dive.
It's a heavy thought.
It is. If an entire society can accept a structural norm like forcing a child into a dangerous detour to maintain a system of segregation for 50 years before recognizing the inherent inequality.
What deeply embedded norms in our own society are currently operating unchallenged?
Exactly. Decades from now, what current legal or social structures will future generations look back on and unanimously recognize as completely absurd?
It's definitely something to think about.
Something to think about the next time you look out your window and measure the distance to the end of your street.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.